Hi Flosstube, I'm Deb. I'm the Traveling Stocking Stitcher, and I'm really glad you're able to join me today. I'm going to show you how I have loaded charts from Chatelaine into Pattern Keeper and used them to stitch a number of Chatelaine designs. Once you've gone to the effort to load the Chatelaine in, there's some things you need to know about before you can start stitching a Chatelaine in Pattern Keeper to keep an eye out for. And my goal really is to get more people stitching Chatelaines. They're beautiful designs. I think a lot of people are intimidated though. Maybe it's the size, they think they're huge. This one back here I did, and that's a small one. It's a good way. I did it to get myself familiar with Chatelaines first, and so this is the Mini Mystery Mandala 03, and so you don't have to do a big one. Another thought is, well, they require specialty stitches, and I don't know how to do those. They're not very complicated. There's diagrams that show you how to do that in the chart, and it actually makes your stitching a little more fun. Maybe you think, oh, I got to stitch it on linen, and that's not the case. Maybe if you're not familiar with linen. I did this one on Aida, and there weren't a lot of fractional stitches or any fractional stitches, and so depending on the chart, you might be able to just use Aida if that's what your comfort zone is. But I think probably another misconception is that their charts are difficult to read and they aren't compatible with Pattern Keeper. And I have found that they take a little more challenge. You've got to read the instructions, but getting them into Pattern Keeper, I've been able to pretty successfully do that with a number of charts. Sometimes I get a little frustrated with the internet because people ask, are Chatelaines able to be loaded in Pattern Keeper? And a lot of times they just shoot back the answer that no, they're not compatible, end of story, period, move along. Occasionally they will also give you reasoning because Pattern Keeper does not handle fractionals, because it doesn't handle specialty stitches, it doesn't handle backstitching. I don't think that that is true. As a matter of fact, I have found Pattern Keeper to help me with a lot of those things. So fractionals, I think you can do those with blends and parking feature. I'll talk about that. I think it's easier to do that than from stitching it from paper, certainly. I've done lots of charts that have separate charts for backstitching where they overlay the backstitching on the chart on another piece of paper, so it's not unheard of that I would need to use a different chart for backstitching, and that's what I do. I just go look at the PDF when it comes time to do the backstitching. I don't think that's unreasonable. And as for specialty stitches, they appear as big blank spaces, so you kind of have a clue as to maybe I need to go look at the PDF and see what the chart is there. You got to go over there anyway and look at the PDF to read the instructions, see the diagram, understand what color, know how many plies you have to do. So specialty stitches, you can see where they're supposed to go, and you have to go to the PDF anyway for the extra information. So I don't think that's a reason not to load things into Pattern Keeper. And so many of us gotten used to Pattern Keeper that you dread the thought of using anything else. You have to go back to stitching off of a PDF chart or even a paper chart. They make paper charts. I really recommend the PDFs because you can make them bigger, but you can also then load them into Pattern Keeper. And I'm not sure I would have embraced Chatelaines as much as I have if it hadn't been for the fact that I can use them in Pattern Keeper, because it makes a huge difference. And because they're big, you want to be able to speed up your process to get these things done, and I found that Pattern Keeper does a great job of making me stitch faster. Now it is a minor miracle that they do load into Pattern Keeper at all, because if you think about the fact, these were designed many decades ago in some cases, and on software that by today's standards would be considered antiquated, and they like I say, they were done decades before Pattern Keeper even existed. So I think there's just the thought that there's no way that they could be compatible with Pattern Keeper. Where there are issues, I think a lot of them are because the charts have been compressed. Because they are so big, they've been compressed to fit on a single page of a PDF. And I'll talk about some ways to get around that as well. As far as flosses, Pattern Keeper has a mechanism for loading the floss colors, and so it's no big deal that they aren't DMC. Sometimes that's another reason that they say it can't handle custom things. It can. Is loading the floss tedious? Sure. But once you get those symbols associated with the colors in Pattern Keeper, you don't have to worry about what those symbols actually are. And one thing about Chatelaines is sometimes the the symbols are very similar to one another. You'll have a big circle and a little circle, or you'll have an arrow pointing one way and then a different kind of arrow pointing the same way. So I like to have those associations done so that when I start stitching, I don't have to worry about what the symbol is. I can just go ahead and start stitching whatever the color says it is. So, and it also helps you, I'll talk about ways that you can make sure that your colors are accurate when you get those questions about, is it the big circle or the little circle? A lot of chatelaine charts provide DMC alternatives, so if you don't want to work with the silks, especially flosses, or it's too expensive, I would recommend that you check the Chatelaine DE website. They do have some material lists where they show you all the things that you need, and if there are DMC alternatives, you can use those as well. So that shouldn't be a deterrent for using a chatelaine, doing chatelaines, but you can load either one into Pattern Keeper. Another thinking is that Pattern Keeper can't handle 1/1, and it shows up in the chart. Usually there's 4 to a square because you're doing over 1, you're going to put 4 different stitches in there, and so visibly they're seeable. Can you check off the individual ones? No. Usually they're not real big areas. I haven't myself stitched on anything that has 1/1s yet, but I've loaded some that have 1/1s, and I can see clearly what the symbols are. So again, just go refer to the PDF. It's not a big area to do. I can get that done and then come back to my chart. And again, because I know what those symbols are, I can look at Pattern Keeper to help me with figuring out what colors I should be using on the 1/1s. So that's my little soapbox diatribe about why people have kind of dismissed Pattern Keeper out of hand for chatelaines, and I think it's unnecessary. So let's show you how to get things loaded. Now occasionally you get lucky and a chart will just go in without any intervention or with some minor standard manipulation of providing the chart size. But just by nature of chatelaines, sometimes, usually they'll have a black and white and a color, and you only want to load one of those in. So usually you're going to have to do a little bit of choosing which charts that you want to use. And sometimes with a big mandala that has a lot of different pieces to it, you may need to load those individually. And sometimes one chart out of all those might not load, but it's still more valuable to me to be able to get 9 pieces loaded, and then the 10th one I just have to stitch off the PDF. So even if you don't get everything loaded up, I would still recommend using Pattern Keeper. I'm also working on writing up some written procedures for how to do this, and I've been working with Ella, who is the daughter of Martina Rosenberg, the designer, and she is the owner of Chatelaine.de website that you can order the charts from, and she wants to put some procedures up on Pattern Keeper on her website. So I'll be providing a lot of this information to her, so if you want to see a written form, that should be available to you eventually as well. So I'm going to put up some screenshots of how I go through the process. Mostly it's going to be a happy path, but I will also show you some exceptions of things that you might need to do a little bit differently. This will probably cover a great number of the scenarios that you'll run into. And then I'll also talk about some other things that help you, once you get things loaded, how to stitch things. Now there are a few exceptions to the rule, and the old class files are what they called it when they broke the charts up into individual pieces and would, almost like a stitch along, they would introduce them once a month or what have you. And there's kind of 2 flavors of that. One are standalone motifs, and so typically each chart is a different motif, and you're going to have to load those individually. And you're going to only want to load, and this applies to everything, you want to really load only the black and white chart. This Pattern Keeper, you'll fill in, the colors will fill in as you stitch things. But with these individual motifs, you're going to get one chart, but you have to stitch it multiple times, and I'll address how to go through that. An example of that would be this Venice mandala that I've done, and you notice that there are different elements. So we've got the Rialto Bridge, that has to be done 4 times, that's one separate chart. Each of the windows, the sets of 3 windows, the 2 windows on either side are a little bit differently, so those are different charts. You get all 3 windows in one chart, but this set of windows is a little bit different than this set of windows, for instance. And then the masks in the corner, those were a different chart. So you get the sense that you have to load those all up. And I'll talk about the ways that you go about stitching that. Some of the old file charts, while they were broken up, they are in 4 quadrants, and they're integrated. You load it up as a single chart, and Pattern Keeper will knit it all together. Another plus for you. So you don't have to worry about, typically they don't have the overlaps to help you align things. So if you're working from one page and then you have to go over to the next page, it can be really tricky to make sure you've got things aligned. And Pattern Keeper will take all that concern away from you and do that for you. An example of one that's integrated is I've got this whip of Pompeii mandala, and so I've got basically a quarter of it done here. I've got a start on the middle and then this building here, and then it runs into this tree here, and you'll notice that right on the other side is the next tree, and then I start stitching the building again. So even though they're different elements, they really are tied all together, and they're just stitched over and over again. So you want to do that as one chart so you don't have to worry about the overlaps. If you're not familiar with using Pattern Keeper, I did a video, episode number 19, about a year ago, which I discussed the top 10 reasons that Pattern Keeper has transformed my stitching. And so it's not specifically to chatelaines, like this video is, but that one is going to discuss some benefits you might want to look into as well if you're not familiar with that. For one thing, it helps you find all the symbols for a selected color, so it can help you with something as large scale as chatelaines to not have to make sure there's not a ton of confetti I've found in some chatelaines, but speed is always important. If you're tackling something that's 2 feet by 2 feet, you want to speed the process up so you can get it done quickly. It also helps you to mark off the stitches, so when you're doing the confetti you don't get confused as to what you've done and haven't done and run the risk of missed stitches, so that can be an issue. So once you link that color to the symbol, you don't have to refer to the key, which can be difficult, like I mentioned, to read in chatelaine charts because of the similarity of symbols. And Pattern Keeper allows you to track your progress. Now, the old class charts where you're doing multiple motifs, you're going to kind of have to keep a separate spreadsheet if you really want to track your progress, because like I mentioned, you have one chart, but you stitch it 4 times. So you're going to have to do a little bit of the math. I'll kind of show you what I've done to create a spreadsheet for that as well. And because you mark your stitches off electronically in Pattern Keeper, you don't run the risk of getting ink or highlighter on one of these big, expensive things that you've invested a lot of time in. That would be my worry about marking things off. So that risk has gone away. You don't have to worry about doing that as well. There's support out there. There is the Chatelaine support group on Facebook, and there also is the Stitching with Pattern Keeper Facebook group out there. So you can use those if you've run into problems or have questions. And another thing that I like is the Pattern Keeper app stays open. If I'm working on a PDF chart on my tablet or phone or what have you, it's going to time out. Yeah, you can do overriding to stop it from doing that, but then you have to keep switching that back and forth when you stop stitching. So there is a new version of PK Pattern Keeper that's being rolled out, and I don't have it yet. I'm assuming that none of these procedures will change, but I just want to put a warning in there that I think it's mostly new functionality. I think they may also be introducing a version that can be used on Apple products. Right now it is Android only, but my understanding is they're doing new things like being able to identify stitches that need to be picked out later. That I think is the big change that's coming. So just to be aware, things may change, but I don't expect that they will. So I'm going to just go ahead and put up some screenshots here as I walk through the process to show you what it looks like. First up is you want to open up Pattern Keeper, and right from the home page there is a plus button on the lower right hand corner, and click that plus button. I've taken these screenshots from my phone. I typically stitch on a phone, so my orientation is vertical on these. If you're using a tablet, maybe you'd use horizontally, but just to let you know, this is what it looks like to me. And once you click that plus sign, it's going to come up with an option to select the PDF file You can do a PDF file, and there's a camera setting. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But I would recommend, especially if you're starting out new, stick with a PDF file. I find that much easier to use. It does say that the camera version is experimental, and I found it to be a little bit fiddly. So choose your PDF, and once you say you want to load a PDF, it's going to pop up where you have your PDFs loaded. I keep mine, like I say, in Google Drive, and here's my choices that I have available to choose, and I click the one that I want to load. And you may or may not get this message that says no grids are found in the PDF, and they do have a little video if you want to watch the little video, but you can just say OK to that if it doesn't find any grids. You want to then scroll down to the first black and white chart. The design's likely going to be broken up into multiple charts, like I mentioned, because they're big. They probably don't fit into a single page of the PDF, and if the charts are already highlighted with this turquoise grid that I'm showing here, you can just move along because it's already been able to detect the size of the grid and put that on there and overlaid it perfectly. That's your ideal situation. Sometimes it can't do that. If they're not highlighted, then what it's going to look like, probably none of the charts are highlighted in that case. So you're going to get a message that says no grids found in PDF. Add grids for the chart, add grids for the page containing the chart, and that'll show up at the top of the page here. And you just want to scroll through your PDF in Pattern Keeper, and you want to find the first black and white chart that you have. And once you get to that page that has the first black and white chart, and you're going to have to put in the size of the chart. So you want to count what size the grid is. Now, not the stitched area. You want to count all of the squares. So figure out how many squares run across the width and how many squares run across the length. And we'll be putting those in eventually. You want to click the plus button. The default is a 10 by 10 grid, and that's going to appear, turquoise grid's going to appear over your chart. And I find it best to stretch those to the very edges of the chart before I put in the dimensions of the chart. There's handles. You see the round circles. They're handles, and they're on each corner, and then they're also in the middle. I find it easier to use the middle edges because I only have to align it to that one edge. If you use the corner, you have to get both the horizontal and the vertical lines aligned, and I get one done and then I mess up the other one. So I find it easier to use the ones that are on the side to do that. And you can make the screen bigger, just like you do on your phone or your tablet. Zoom it out so you can see the grid as best you can, and make sure that you've got those lined up real close to the edge, right on the edge lines, because that's important. Click on the little pencil icon, and when I do that, it's going to pop up a little window that shows me width and length, and it's defaulted in with a 10 by 10, and so I want to put those numbers in for width and length and click OK. You may have to do a little bit of adjusting a little bit to tweak it, but you really want it to be an exact overlay, and you'll see if any of those lines are off. Otherwise it won't be able to be used in Pattern Keeper. I'll talk a little bit about the exceptions. Like I said, I've had a chart where it has been stretched to, the PDF has been stretched to fit onto a single page, and I think that's where most of the issues come in when things are not loadable, and I've got a way to address that. If there's more charts that you need to load, and the scenario here would be if you're doing one of those old class file charts where they're integrated and there's like 4 quadrants of it, you want to keep going and load all 4 of those at once. If it's just a smaller design, there's only one chart, you could be done, or if there's other ones that you need to put in at once. The scenario where you have the old class charts that have separate motifs, you're going to get one chart and you have to stitch them multiple times. You're going to load one and finish the process. Load the next one, finish the process. So right now I'll take you through what happens if I'm doing one of those where I want to load multiple charts at one time. Go back to the top of the PDF in Pattern Keeper and kind of scroll through. Now if it has detected any other charts, a color chart, you want to do just black and white. If it's detected a color chart or some other charts like the multiple standalone charts, you want to hit the trash can icon to any that you do not want to load with that. There may not be any. If it wasn't able to detect any charts, there might not be anything to load. You won't see the trash can icon in that case. Sometimes there's bonus charts or alternate charts, so you don't want to load those as well either. You just want the basic chart that you're going to be dealing with to be loaded. So if there are more charts, you want to go on and go to the next black and white chart that's out there and repeat the steps that we just went through. So once I've deleted any extraneous things, I will click OK. And you may get a message that says, does the chart excerpt below have any shaded or lightly colored rows or columns at the edge? And it's going to show you a little image of the chart. So you want to select no or yes is appropriate. This example here has a little line across the top where there is an overlap, fairly uncommon in the chatelaines that I've loaded. So in this case I would say yes. Otherwise, if there's no overlap, you'd say no. If I say yes, I'm going to choose how many rows of overlap there is or how many columns of overlap. In this example, there's 1, so I would change the drop-down list box to 1 and click OK. And what's going to pop up next is to click the Input Thread Numbers button. So it says it successfully loaded or imported your chart, but they couldn't import all the thread numbers. And this is typical of chatelaines. I don't know if I've ever seen one where the colors actually came in from the key. It may have happened once, but it's pretty unusual. It says please input the missing numbers and verify that the legend in the mockup looks correct. So you push the Input Thread Numbers button. You may get a quick tip message that says if you don't want to add the colors now, you can assign a flat gray color. And if it's okay, click OK. This is a message that you can suppress and don't show it again, so this may be something you've already turned off, so this may not occur for you. So if it does, click OK. If you want to continue adding the colors now, you can click the 3 vertical dots that are in the upper right hand corner. If you don't want to do that yet, you can do that later, and I will show you how to do that. If that's the case, just click the right arrow in the lower right hand corner and it will finish processing the load for you. If you have other charts that you need to load as part of the class, the standalone ones, you want to go ahead and load those up as well, and do each one just following the procedures we did from start to finish. And then maybe you want to do all your colors, because you're going to have to load the colors in on each chart individually. And they may not always have the same colors, but you're going to have to do them each time. So kind of a tip for that is if you have PK and Pattern Keeper loaded on your phone and on a tablet, pull up one that you've already loaded the colors in and then go over to your other device and kind of use that as a reference point, so you don't have to guess every time and do all the research to say, well, is this the right one or is that the right one? If you've already done it once, use that reference for you. So let's say we're going to do the colors now. You click on the 3 vertical dots in the upper right hand corner, and then I will select Advanced Options, also in the upper right hand corner, and select Assign a Flat Gray Color to all the unassigned symbols. So you've got 2 choices. One talks about Gecko Rouge, which is a different designer. We're going to do the bottom selection to assign a flat gray color. The floss list will show up all on the left hand panel, and you'll see all the different symbols there, and the space that's in there as you load the colors. You'll see the numbers appear in that area, and then there's a little icon. It's assuming that they're all custom because you see a little artist palette. That's the symbol for custom. If you load DMCs, you'll see a little horse head, which is, I think, the DMC logo design. So once we click on one of those symbols from that left panel, you're going to see this window pop up. It's going to show the symbol at the top of the screen that you're working on, so if you forget, you don't have to worry about that. And there's a line at the top, and that's where you're going to type in your floss color. I'm going to start with the DMC example first. Over the little drop-down window, the first one on the right there, at the top is that little artist palette. If you click on that drop-down list box, you want to select DMC from the list. Now it's usually at the top, and you may have to scroll up to see it. So sometimes I will click the DMC or the selection to change it to DMC first, and then enter the color, because it seems like it works a little better that way. And once I've selected that and entered the number in there, and it knows it's DMC, it will show a band of the color. So it's kind of a reference point for you to know that, okay, this is the color I would expect to see. 3822 in this example is kind of a yellowish color. So that's your first clue that you've gotten things correctly loaded. If it's totally different color, you might want to make sure that you didn't key something in incorrectly. So then you can just click Save, and the color is going to display next to the symbol on that left side pane, and the color is also going to be filled in on the chart. You see a little mock-up there, and you'll start to see the colors appearing there as you enter each symbol. It's just another good cross-check for you to make sure the color looks appropriate for what you're doing. If you see two symbols, two smaller symbols in the same box, those are going to be fractionals, and we'll talk through that in a minute. Next, we're going to load some specialty flosses, some non-DMC flosses. And pretty much the same process. You select the symbol you want to load from the left navigation panel, and it's going to take you to the same window, and you'll see the symbol at the top. Now, a little hint for you, the naming convention for a petite treasure braid that is used in a lot of Martina Rosenberg's designs for chatelaines, she would typically use a capital letter. So if you see an A or a G, that's a kind of a hint to you that those are some of the more common petite treasure braids. So you want to enter that into the field. I typically will enter not only a number but also the color, so it'll help me a little bit. So if I'm doing PB01, I will put bright gold, I think is the name of it. If I'm doing PB 26, I think it is like an antique gold. So I'll put the name in there too, just to give me a clue, because they're very similar looking flosses, or threads. And so, you know, your Glorianas you'd also put in here. There's not typically a naming convention for some of those. She did use, like Glorianas usually would be GLO in the number, and again I would put the descriptor of the color, because that's when I'm looking for something. I'm looking for a purple color versus a green color. Helps me out a little bit. And again, you keep the palette icon as the custom, and the one thing we're going to do differently is because it doesn't know DMC colors, it doesn't know what these colors are, you're going to have to tell it what color it is. So there's a little eyedropper next to that first field where you've entered in your floss number, and you want to click on that eyedropper. It's going to pop up this window to select a color. So you want to choose a color that's in the same color family. So using our example of gold, I'll pick this kind of most goldish looking color that's out there. I can adjust that in a second. And then to get closer to that actual color, you want to scroll horizontally down at the bottom. The color hues are listed or shown there, and you can select the right intensity that you want that gets closest to the floss color that you're looking at. And the closer you get, the more accurate the mock-up is going to look and the design is going to appear in Pattern Keeper. And once you find one you like, click Select. It's going to come back to the original window. You're going to see your color that's associated with that you've chosen, and you want to then click Save. Now here's the example for the two tiny little symbols. These are, like I say, fractionals, and I talked about people saying you can't do fractionals in Pattern Keeper. This is an example of how they appear for you. I find that it's easy to figure out where their placement is in the box. If it's up in the upper right hand corner, this one goes this way, and if this one in the lower half, it goes that way. So you can figure out what's going on with the way the chart looks. What I do when I load these up is I load them as a blend. They're not a blend. I'm not going to put the colors together, but I am going to treat them as two different symbols and stitch half of the stitch one way and half the stitch the other way. I'm going to enter the information at the top of the field as usual for usually the upper symbol is what I do. So I know that I'm talking about the upper symbol that's appearing. So I'll put that in the first row of information, and if I have to select the color, and like we just did for a petite treasure braid or Gloriana or what have you, a specialty floss that's not DMC, just do it as you normally do. But then you'll notice there's these two overlapping circles kind of in the middle of that screen. And I click on that, and that enables the lower portion, the lower row of information to be able to be entered. So then I will put in what the other color is that's going to be the other half of the fractional stitch. Put the number of the floss with the name of the color, perhaps if you need to, if it's a specialty thing. If you need to go through and if it's a DMC, you need to select the DMC choice from the drop-down list, or you may have to click the eyedropper to choose the appropriate color, as we just finished doing as well. So you want to just kind of go through your whole color list and assign all the colors to things. Do a gut check to make sure that the colors look right along the left-hand side of the chart. You'll notice on the left pane it will also show you'll be building the color chart. So right along that left margin you'll see the colors that are associated with the symbol. Just make sure that they look like they're appropriate. You know what your DMC colors look like. Maybe do a cross-check or flip through your specialty flosses to make sure that you've loaded the right color for those as well. If everything looks okay, you can click the right-hand button that's at the bottom of the window, and that will open the chart for you. If it's part of a class, you want to then go back and repeat the process until you've got all those individual black and white charts loaded as separate charts. And then you will, again, need to load the colors individually on those as well. If you wanted to do this process after you've got all your charts loaded, instead of choosing the 3 dots that are up in the upper right-hand window, if you're in the Pattern Keeper homepage, you want to click what's called a little hamburger menu, those 3 horizontal lines at the bottom from the main menu, and I select Edit Legend from the menu, about halfway down there. And then it's going to just pull up a screen that's very similar to what we've seen already. It shows you your left-hand panel. You click on it, you go in and associate your color to your symbol. Now I do have some tips for how to differentiate between those symbols that look very similar. It's not uncommon to have that happen, so I've got some suggestions for you that you might want to try. First of all, you want to keep an eye out for similar or even reverse image symbols. So, if they're pointing one way versus pointing another way, you don't want to enter the wrong color. So just, eyeball that whole chart and see, is there any two symbols that look very similar before you start loading things in. Make sure that you look at all the symbols in the color key to make sure there isn't a closer match for what you should be loading up there. So you want to enter one possible color and then check the mock-up. So if you're really not sure if this symbol looks like another symbol, because maybe one's a little circle and one's a big circle, try one and then look at the mock-up that appears and say, does that look right? Is it color orange and I'm doing a leaf that should be green? Just kind of do some rationalization of that. When you're done with loading all your colors, look at your mock-up again. Does everything seem to make some sense? There's a way to go to a bigger version of the mock-up. If you go back to that hamburger menu and you click those 3 horizontal lines at the bottom from the main menu, the choice comes up and you can do View Mock-up, and this will show you a bigger image of the mock-up with the colors that you've loaded into the design. So kind of look it over and make sure it looks correct. One other potential pitfall that you want to keep an eye out for when you're loading your colors is negative images. So it looks like one image on the PDF, when you load it into Pattern Keeper, it looks like the opposite of that image. And I'll show you an example of one that I have found. So this is the key here, and you'll see that 904, which is forest green, very dark, looks like on the key it's a black square with a white circle in the middle. And then there's another example down below here where we've got beaver gray, but this looks like a white square and then it's got a black circle around it and there's white in the middle. So it just looks like that somebody drew a black circle around it. And then you can see how those appear in Pattern Keeper. So the black background with the white circle actually looks like a white background with a black circle, and the other one that looks like a drawn circle, a black circle, is actually a white circle on a black background. So it's almost like looking at a photographic negative. Now, there is a setting in Pattern Keeper where there's a theme. If you go up and click on the little gear icon, the settings icon in Pattern Keeper at the top of the page, the first thing you see is, under the general category, is the theme, and there's a light and dark. So when it's in light setting, this is where I've seen this negative image thing appear. And if you change it to dark, here's a side-by-side comparison of what that looks like between the two different light and dark settings. On the left-hand side, you've got the light, and this is that reverse image look. When I set it to dark, it matches the key. So while you're loading your stuff up, you might want to look at that. Unfortunately, when you see that left-hand panel, it does not change it to the dark setting. It's only when you're looking at the chart, when you're in the stitching section of the chart. So I would kind of go through looking at all the chart symbols and seeing if in the dark mode that makes a difference or not. When you go back to stitching, you don't have to leave it in the dark mode because you'll have all those associated and you don't have to worry what the symbols look like at that point. Again, I really like Pattern Keeper for that once I got the stuff loaded, I don't care what the symbol looks like. But just be aware of that because that can really foul up your stuff if you get the wrong color, and it's very easy to do accidentally. So that's kind of the happy path of how to load your chart and your colors in. I'm going to now go through some exceptions for loads, so if you run into a little bit of problem, these are the things to look out for. So if the grids don't line up, or the grid goes beyond the screen edge. Typically I've seen this happen with really big charts, and if you enter the width and length and the grids don't align, or sometimes the grid will just go off the edge and you can see the left hand side maybe of the little handles, the round handles, but I can't get to the edge, it's off the screen, and I can't make it bigger or smaller to get to that edge. It's likely that the image was manipulated when the PDF was created. So the workaround is to go back over into the PDF and you're going to zoom out to make the image as large as you possibly can on your screen, and then you want to take a screenshot of the image and you want to do subsections of it. This is one that I ran into in Gardens of London because it's a 367 by 367 and it's just huge, but inside the chart it was mushed up and you can barely even see the individual squares. So that's kind of your first clue that something different's going on. So what I did is I went back to the original PDF and I zoomed it out as big as I could, the section I was going to work on, and I had to take it up and break it into subsections. And I took a screenshot of one corner of it and a screenshot of the next corner of it, and so on and so forth. Depending on how large it is, you want to break it into chunks. And I found about a quarter at a time worked about the best, I think. And then you may need to crop as necessary, but you may want to leave a little bit of margin around the edges of the grid just to give you a little wiggle room to manipulate and position the grid. And then you want to take that screenshot and print it from a JPEG to a PDF. Now, hopefully your printer has a way to do that, and there's some software. It's a little bit out of the realm of what I want to get into here, but if you have a way to change that into a PDF, do that. You may have to play around with it a little bit, so when you're printing it to PDF, try portrait, try landscape, because again, sometimes the charts will be flipped around, so you want to be able to see that whole image on the page that you're going to be printing, that you want to load, that whole subset, you want to be able to see that at once. And then take that PDF and load it using the regular procedures that we have. And then you're going to have to do that for each of those subsections that you've created. So that's kind of the workaround. Not the easiest thing, but again, if it gets it in Pattern Keeper, you can stitch that way. Aces. The other issue with doing this, and what makes it not a perfect solution, is you won't be able to load the key or the colors or do searches. So you'll only be able to move around and mark off stitches. And when the highlighted stitches are updated, they're going to appear gray instead of the actual color. And for this reason, this is the only time that I would load the color chart that I've found, rather than the black and white. And the thinking here is, at least you can see the color chart to begin with the stitches you haven't stitched yet, which is a little bit the opposite of what you normally do in Pattern Keeper, because they're going to end up being one big gray blob when you get it all stitched. So the picture also, it might also be a little grainy because it was so compressed in the original PDF. It's possible that the resolution might be a little less than desirable. So, but again, if you've got that problem with the PDF, I found that making the subset and blowing them up and making them more reasonable, even if I just work off the JPEGs and don't ever load it into Pattern Keeper, it helped me to be able to see the chart better. So if you forget Pattern Keeper, I just want to stitch it and be able to see it better, create a subset and be able to blow it up. Another scenario that I've run into is when both the color and the black and white charts load automatically. Now, I mentioned that typically it doesn't just detect it and load it in automatically, but I've ran across one I think it was Marrakesh Nights, that loaded up automatically. And so it didn't give me the option to choose which one I wanted. And at the time of loading, that Pattern Keeper presented me with a question about whether the chart has any overlap. And so you'd answer as appropriate, and then you'll be asked to select the correct size for this chart. And if both the black and white and the color charts are loaded, the sizes might seem out of whack. It doesn't seem like the stitch count chart, the stitch count is anywhere close to it, and because it's going to be double in size. So in this example I have here, it's told me it's 170 by 340. Well, this is a square mandala, so that doesn't compute because it's twice as long as it is wide. The bottom choice is the opposite. It's twice as wide as it is long. And so I made a choice based on what I was using. I'm using a phone typically, so I'm used to looking at things vertically, so I chose to pick the 170 by 340. It's going to line them up. If you're used to using a tablet and you're used to more of the landscape as opposed to the portrait view, you may want to choose the other option, 340 by 170, and have that show up that way. And actually, I didn't see this as a huge drawback to have both of them there, because I have a black and white and I have a color, and I can see both right in the chart, and I can just move around as necessary to see it. Now you're going to have to, if you like to keep track of your counts, be cognizant of the fact that you've doubled your stitch count. So just divide that in half and figure, okay, if I've got 25% of the chart done, it's really probably only about 12.5% of the chart done, because I'm not going to stitch them twice. If you don't want to see both of those in, there's the workaround where you can take a copy of the PDF that contains only the desired chart. Now, you can either do it with the screenshot thing I told you about, or you can, another option that the Pattern Keeper webpage talks about is they have software that is called ilovepdf.com, and they have a page where you can remove pages from your PDF, so you can just focus on one PDF at a time. So that might be helpful to you as well. And maybe you want to do that up front, or you want to do that before you load in your charts altogether. Something to think about and look at. Now, there are some advanced options in loading a PDF, and I'm just going to talk about it. I haven't been able to get it to work. I think that there's possibly a bug, and I've logged that in the Pattern Keeper website. But what happens is, and I've tried this on a compatible chart, something that is considered a PDF or a PK compatible, Pattern Keeper compatible. So it's not just a Chatelaine thing. But when you first click that plus to load a chart, a little box shows up, and down below there's an advanced options choice. And if I click on that, it opens up this window where there's a number of different things to choose. And the first one I thought might be helpful. So it is a advanced import option to show all steps. And the thinking for this is it's going to prevent Pattern Keeper from doing those educated guesses and kind of plop grids down on things where it thinks it has found a thing. And you can intervene, and if something is the wrong size or the grid layout is incorrect, it should allow you to make choices all along the way manually without having it detected. And the problem with this is when you go through that, then it takes you to that question about is there overlap? And typically Chatelaines don't have overlaps, and so it didn't show me the picture of the overlap. It just showed me the yes or no. And if I clicked no, it did nothing. If I clicked yes, it did nothing. So I could not get past that point. So if that's not fixed, ideally that would let you get around some of these issues, but it doesn't seem to be working. Like I said, there's a new release coming out that maybe this has been addressed already. I don't know, but just be aware that if you're wondering why I'm not talking about that, I've not been able to get it to work. There's also, when I first showed you the screen where we talked about the PDF, there's also that camera option, and this can be used to import a paper chart by photographing it. Take a screenshot, like the things I've been talking about. You could load that screenshot directly using this camera option, but I found it to be a little finicky to work with. The stretching of the screen is not those nice round things that you can just kind of pull and easily align them. You have to hold the circles and press it, and it kind of creates this distorted parabola. I don't know if that's the right word, but it takes a little more finesse, and I didn't have the patience to finish it. So I just found it a more fiddly to work with. I would prefer to take the photograph, convert it to a PDF, and then go ahead and load that as a PDF. Sometimes a chart just won't load. I've had this a couple of times, you know, on my Venice mandala, where I've got all these different motifs, and one set of the windows didn't load. I think I know why it didn't do that, because there was a line of text that had like the copyright on the paper, and that was right next to it. I think Pattern Keeper might have seen that as a line of text or part of the grid and tried to load that. Now, we had a little bit of success. My husband and I were both working on trying to figure this out because he's very computer savvy, and we tried just, you know, drawing a line through the text, and that seemed to make Pattern Keeper like it a little bit better. So if you've got something that's very close to the edge of the screen, or there's some extra text around it, try just wiping that out and see if that helps, or kind of redact it like a classified document, some top secret document that you want to just black out the text so it doesn't get confused by that. And like I say, if I can get 9 of the 10 motifs loaded, I'm happy. I can do that one motif off of a PDF or a paper chart or whatever. I'm just so pleased to get 90% of it in that I'm not going to worry about the little one chart that doesn't go in for me. So it's possible you might not be able to get it loaded, but it's better than nothing. One of the other benefits of loading things into Pattern Keeper is even if I'm not going to be able to stitch from that chart at all, I can access my PDF from inside Pattern Keeper. So in an instance where maybe I can't get one chart loaded, I can go ahead and look at my PDF for stitching, but I can use Pattern Keeper open at the same time and access the PDF from there so that I could look at my specialty stitches, instructions, or what have you. So to do that, you go to find your chart in the main page of Pattern Keeper, the home page, and click on that hamburger menu icon, the little 3 lines that are in the lower right hand corner. And it's going to pop up this list, and from there I'm going to choose View PDF. So you can go ahead and access that at any time and then go back into the chart as needed. I have a suggestion for you that you might want to give it a try. On the Chatelaine.de website, there is a freebie that you could use, and it's called Tiny Marie Antoinette Rosegate. And if it's your first chatelaine and you want to try using Pattern Keeper, even if it's not your first chatelaine, you can try to load something up and see how it goes. Now, it did have a few quirks to it. It had some specialty stitches, but it also had some, most of them had DMC conversions. It's a small chart, but you can give it a shot. If you don't have Pattern Keeper and you wanted to give Pattern Keeper a try and you want to do chatelaines, Pattern Keeper is about, I think it's $9 a one-time fee. So it's not a very expensive thing, and for the amount of time and effort it has saved me, I think it's well worth the investment. So I hope you'll give those a try. So now that we've got our file loaded in Pattern Keeper, I'm going to go through some workarounds or some things to be aware of, show you what things look like in Pattern Keeper so you know how to deal with those when you start stitching your stuff. Fractionals. You've loaded your colors already for fractionals. You've seen how those appear. Because of the way that the chart is designed, even though Pattern Keeper typically can't handle fractionals, I find them easy to use in Pattern Keeper. You want to be careful when you're stitching that you don't mark the whole box off, because you can only mark one box at a time and mark that as stitched. So I leave it blank until I get the other half stitched, and then I will check that off as complete. And it's usually pretty easy to tell that you've done the 1/2 stitch. I have tried to use parking. Now I don't park threads, but Pattern Keeper does handle parking. And I thought about using that because you can mark a certain corner of the square as where you put your parked thread. Now in this case I was going to use it and say, okay, I've already done the upper right hand corner of my stitch, my half stitch, and it's going to leave the lower right hand corner unchecked. I just found it took more time. You have to go into a separate window and choose which of the corners you've done, and then go back, and then later you have to come back and uncheck it, and then you have to mark it as complete. It's an option if you want to do it. I found it a little bit time consuming, so I'm good with just having this hole there that I know I need to come back to. So specialty stitches. How to handle those when they're not compatible with Pattern Keeper. Now they are going to appear as big blank spaces because usually specialty stitch is going to take up more than one square. So usually it's a 4x4 or even a 3x2 or different size. And it's this big hole that you're pretty much sure that you're going to need to put something else in there. And like I say, you're going to have to go back and look at the PDF for all the details about the color and the number of plies. And so go over and look at your diagram and add those in, whether you do it while you're stitching your regular stitches or you want to go back after the fact before you do your beading and do all your special stitches at once. It's up to you. If you have beads, those are going to display typically as a number. That usually is the convention that Martina used. Sometimes I've seen some show up as black dots, or a lot of times you'll see them as just blank single squares, as opposed to specialty stitches, which is more than one square. Beads are typically going to be one single square, the normal size beads. Larger embellishments, you might actually see a symbol for them showing up. I've got an example here. So larger embellishments like crystals may show up as a large capital letter that covers multiple squares, and that usually means it's a bigger embellishment, a crystal or something. What sometimes happens is when you have those, the Pattern Keeper load recognizes that there's something in a square there, and so it may try to load a section of that. And here's an example of one where I've got a partial symbol in the floss list, and they look to be, part of one of those letters. So I usually just go ahead and put in either a white color, 000 or B5200, and just have them show up as white, and so it just kind of blanks it out, and I don't have to worry about it showing up on my screen or having blank symbols that are showing up on my chart. Backstitching, again, doesn't appear in Pattern Keeper, but I do not think it's particularly onerous to have to go look at the PDF. I can access that PDF like I just showed you in Pattern Keeper, and just refer to the chart as shown. Another thing I've seen happen only once so far, but I do have a workaround for it, is a box that does not highlight when searching for a symbol. So you click the search, and my experience was it kind of flickered at first and looked like it was going to highlight all the boxes, and then when it actually displayed settled down and showed you the things to select, it was almost imperceptible which boxes were selected, because you maybe could see a faint trace of the highlight behind it. Typically the default is green, maybe you've changed your color, or maybe you can't see it at all. And the thinking is that when they designed the chart, they didn't just use the symbol, they put it on a white background, and so it's not transparent. So it's highlighted it, but it's just behind the entire box that fills most of the box for the symbol. So the workaround for this is the light and dark setting again. So click that gear icon, the settings icon, go to the general theme and click on light versus dark. You want to change it to dark. When I did this, it changed it so that the search symbols appeared in white. And so you can see the contrast here between the two settings. So where I couldn't see anything selected in the light mode, at least in the dark mode, now the highlighted boxes have white around it. So I can see, compared to everything else, it looks kind of dark. They're pretty stark white against the rest of it. Now in this scenario, the other one you had to just make your changes, and then you can go back to the other setting. I have to stitch the pattern in this mode, in this dark mode, all the way through, or I'm not going to be able to see what things are highlighted. So this is a little bit different scenario. It takes a little getting used to, but it works out okay. At least it makes you not make mistakes, which is the goal. Now there is some cautions when you're working with a chart that I've run into. Here's an example of the same symbol that's loaded twice. The actual panel showed the same symbol twice. My guess is that when she was designing it, she thought about having it two-toned and then decided that maybe we'll just make it all the same color and forgot to change it over that there's two symbols of the same thing on there. So when I was stitching this particular piece, I would highlight it and there'd be all these symbols that were the same thing right next to it that weren't highlighted, and I've just kind of circled those in red. And that's a real quirk just because the symbol was in the pattern twice. Now you also can see on here where the fractional stitches are, and because those are loaded as different symbols, because they're half stitches with two different symbols on it, they're not going to be highlighted. So just when you're stitching, if you see one in the neighborhood on the chart, go ahead and stitch it. You don't have to go back and stitch that fractional later. Next, I'm going to talk about how to handle those recurring motifs that you have to stitch over and over again in old class files. So if you've got the scenario, there's a few things that you need to be aware of when you're stitching, not just loading, that is a little bit different. So first of all, after you stitch the motif once, you're going to need to clear the marked stitches from the chart so you can restitch them again. I'll talk to how to do that. If you restitch a motif, you're going to have to orient the chart in a different direction. For example, Venice motif, Rialto Bridge, I did it up facing horizontally up the first time, but the next time I stitched it, it stitched vertically, pointing the roof towards the left, and then I stitch it with the roof towards the right, and then finally upside down, which is essentially horizontally like I did the top one. I can just flip my chart over, or my fabric over, and stitch, and the stitches are still going to go the same way. But you want to be careful that you're not flipping your stitching, you're keeping your stitching all the same way. So the way you can get around that is to just kind of change the orientation on your phone, and I'll talk through that. You're also going to have some reference points, so I talked about the placement, so it's not going to show you just the things to stitch, but also the reference points. So we're going to have to deal with how to make sure you're not stitching those again, and how to remove them from your account if you like to track things. Now the other thing, because you've loaded in this chart multiple times, the default is to show you kind of the first page of the PDF on the main page, so you can't tell which is part 1 versus part 2. Etc. So I like to go through and rename my charts and make sure that I'm showing the mock-up. So I'll show you how to do that as well. You want to click on the hamburger icon down the lower right hand screen. You can see my example here as I've loaded 2 different ones, and they all look like the cover sheet. I select Edit Chart Info from the list, and then I want to change the chart name to something more descriptive. So it defaults in is whatever the file name is of the PDF that you loaded. And so the first one, I'm going to put a 1 in front of it, so I know that's where I'm going to start. And I'm going to put center, and then I'm going to say Venice Chatelaine. What have you, whatever naming convention you want to do. And then the next one, I'm going to put 2 and call that the inner frame Venice Mandala. So I know that it belongs to this set of charts, but what sequence that they're in as well. And then the other thing you want to do is, at the bottom there's a checkbox that says use mockup as thumbnail. You want to check that, and so that you actually will see the chart as opposed to just that cover page. So here, when I do that, when I go back to the main menu, I can see the top one looks like the centerpiece, and it's number 1, and it says number 1 there. And the second one, I can see that it's the chart that goes around that centerpiece, just visually, and as well as the name that's on there. As far as how to change the orientation of a class chart to stitch those recurring motifs, the easiest way is to turn your device 90 or 180 or 270 degrees, so that you don't have to mentally in your head think about that. So whether you're stitching the motif on the right or the left or the bottom, you don't want to turn your stitching, or the legs are going to go differently. So the way you want to do this is a setting on your device itself, not in Pattern Keeper. And so I want to swipe down. Typically, if you swipe down twice from the top of the device, just display your device settings, or you can probably search for this setting if you're not familiar with where it is. You want to toggle it from auto rotate to portrait, and so this is a little icon that looks like it's a one or the other. It's not an on or off feature, and it will prevent your device from automatically rotating that image, and you can toggle it back to auto rotate when you're done stitching. So this is a setting that you need to kind of keep changing, otherwise it's never, when you look at a video, it's just going to have it that way, and it won't turn it for you to be landscape as opposed to portrait. How to handle reference points that are there for placement when you're doing these recurring motifs. You're going to need to stitch multiple times, and so usually on mandals you're going to do the center first and then work out from there. So you kind of need that placement there before you can stitch the next piece and know where that gets positioned. So I don't want to restitch those again, and I don't want them in my count. So I'm going to first of all just kind of blank them out, mark them as stitched already essentially. And to speed this up a little bit, I will click on the search icon to highlight the color that I want to find. And then I click the highlight pen that I typically do to mark things off. And then I want to hold and press one of the highlighted icons, and this will pop up a little screen that says, do you want to select all unfinished highlight stitches in a square or all unfinished highlight stitches on a page? So do you want to use the 10 by 10 block, or do you want to delete them out of the entire page, anything that has that symbol? Now, depending on how you want to do this, if you use that color a lot in the portion to be stitched, you don't want those marked off, or you're going to have to go through and manually unmark those. Or maybe you just want to do the 10 by 10 square at a time, so you can kind of control which things you're marking off. So, kind of use your judgment as which is going to be the quickest for you. So once you've chosen whichever one you do, click the check mark, and it's going to mark those, any of those that were found in that area that you've chosen. And then continue this till you get all the symbols that are in that reference points marked off as completed. You also at this point want to maybe write down what the number is, because if you like to track your stitches, you're going to have to subtract out those reference points, so you're not counting those as actually stitched, and you take that out. And I will kind of show you what I've done to create a spreadsheet that you can use to remove those and multiply it times how many motifs that you have, times you have to stitch that motif. So it does get a little bit more cumbersome to track your stitches, but it's doable because you just keep your own spreadsheet on it. Then when you're done stitching that motif, you're going to have to clear those out and do it all over again, but you don't want to get rid of those reference points. So again, you can use that same mass selection thing, but just be aware that you might have to do a little tweaking to re-select things from those reference points again. So once you've stitched things, when you select a stitched thing, it's going to show up as a little frog icon, and that will remove the marks from the stitches, so you'll be able to unhighlight those to be able to restitch them again. So if you do want to track your progress with those multiple charts, before you begin stitching, you want to create a spreadsheet with, I've got columns, so I've got the chart name of what section of the chart that I'm doing, and then I've got the number of stitches for that section, and then the number of complete and the percentage complete. Those are the columns that I put on my spreadsheet, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like here. So in the chart column A, I'm going to put a description of each chart. So this is my center or my inner or what have you that is identified. You may also want to reference how many times the chart needs to be stitched. So in the description I'll, for instance, put maybe corner gate times 4, because I had to do the gate 4 times in the corners. In the next column, the number of stitches column, column B, you want to enter a formula, and this is going to have the total stitch count for the chart from Pattern Keeper minus the number of stitches that you've marked off as reference points. So here's an example. Pattern Keeper shows the chart has 1,000 total stitches. Pattern Keeper shows 100 stitches marked as complete, which are reference points, and so that formula will show that. Now your center typically is not going to, typically your first piece that you do is not going to have those reference points, but in subsequent rows typically you're going to have that. So the calculation I used is equals sum, and then in brackets I put 1000 minus 100, and that should display as 900 total stitches. If the motif repeats, you want to include in the formula the number of times it should be stitched. So again, in this example, I've just added at the end of the brackets the star, the multiple sign, times 4. That will be calculated then as 3,600 actual total stitches for that motif. In the number complete column, column C, you're going to want to create a formula for the total number of completed stitches. Now this is the number you're going to want to change manually every time you update the spreadsheet of the chart so you can keep track of your progress. And this is going to be minus the number of reference points. So before you start stitching, it's going to be 0, but let's say that Pattern Keeper shows a total of 200 completed stitches on the first day you stitch this chart. So you're going to change your formula from 0 to 200. So it's going to be equal sum, and then in closed brackets it's going to be 200 minus 100. Using the example that we just used a minute ago, it should show a calculation of 100 actual completed stitches. In the percentage column, column D, the fourth one over, you're going to divide the number in the number complete cell from that row by the number of stitches, and to get the actual percentage of the chart completed. For this example, it's 100 actually completed divided by the 3,600 because you're doing it times 4, so that's the actual total number of stitches that you've done of this motif. So you want to repeat these formulas on the other rows, adjusting for the number of stitches that are in each motif, and subtracting the number of reference points in each motif, and multiplying by the number of motifs in the chart. So it's going to be different possibly for every single chart that you do. And then in the last row, you want to do a totals row, and so column B is the sum of all the stitches row, column C is the sum of all the number of complete rows, column D is going to be the total of column C divided by the total of column B. So that last figure is how much of the entire chart, and this is again, it's an estimate, it's only full cross stitch, it doesn't include specialty stitches or back stitches, or you wouldn't expect that probably anyway. It doesn't include beads. These are the actual cross stitches, and give or take, because I've got some shout outs and some recommendations for other Chatelaine resources for you. For a Chatelaine seal of approval, I want to call out Maggie at Kitschy Whips and Amy of Fiber Arts Amy. They've been really huge supporters of Chatelaine, and they think these designs are so beautiful and they would like to see more of them stitched, and they're doing everything they can to get people familiar with this. And as Maggie would say, and has said multiple times, it's just stitching. Don't be afraid of Chatelaines. It's just stitching. You know how to do this. And hopefully with using Pattern Keeper, you've got a few more tools in your belt to be able to do that. They host the hashtag Chatelaine Wednesdays on Instagram to encourage you to show your work every week. They're also hosting a Chatelaine retreat in July in Charlotte, even though registration is already closed. But if it's a success, I imagine it will be, based on some of their other retreats that they've done. They'll likely be repeating that in the future. So you want to maybe subscribe to their Instagram account, or they also have a Queen City Stitch Retreat page that you can join, a Facebook page that you can join to be notified when those occur. They have this 2025 SAL with Water Garden going that you can be involved in. And they do have some excellent Chatelaine references on their Flosstube channels. On episode 23 of Kitschy Whips, Maggie did information on how to kit up a Chatelaine, which in itself is a little bit of a little goose chase, because you got to go to a couple different places to compile all of the different sources. So European Cross Stitch, which is a U.S. company, that's another misconception about Chatelaines, is where you typically buy your flosses and your beads and those kinds of things. And then the Chatelaine.de website, which is a German company, that's where you would buy your PDF of the charts. And then fabric you have to get on your own, so typically. And then another great resource, and I recommend, even if you're familiar with it, go over and look again, because you always find something it's like, I don't remember seeing this before, even if you've looked at every Chatelaine multiple times. The Chatelaine Gallery, where you see actually stitched, completed things that people have done. Once you've started stitching one, you want to go over or start stitching one actually, you want to go over and look at it. And this is another good check for your colors, to make sure, does the color I load look like the color on the gallery that somebody else put in there? So another excellent resource for seeing things actually stitched, which look nothing like the mock-ups that you typically see for the charts. So good suggestion for that. And then Amy of Fiber Arts Amy, she recently did her episode number 41. She did a total Chatelaine kit parade, or Chatelaine parade. So it was a combination of whips that she had started. Some cases it was the kit, sometimes it was just the chart. She typically has fabric and all the floss ordered separately, even though she doesn't have it on her radar to ship to stitch those. But I would recommend highly looking at her Flosstube 41 as well if you're interested in Chatelaines, because she got a huge collection of things. I would like you please to let me know if you were able to successfully load some Chatelaines or anything into Pattern Keeper that you didn't expect to go into Pattern Keeper based on this information. Even if things don't go so well, let me know. Maybe it's a scenario I haven't run into yet, because it seems like every one I load I get a little surprise that requires me to do a little bit more adjustments or tweaking or workarounds or what have you. So I'd like to increase that catalog of knowledge I have as well. So feel free to ask away if you have questions about something not loading right. I was even thinking it would be nice to keep maybe a public spreadsheet somewhere that allows people to put in the success rate that they've had. Did it detect the charts automatically? Did they have to manually load the charts? Was it something that you have to split up into charts? Did all of the charts load in, or did you have to split it up or make pictures of them? So it might not be a bad idea to start thinking about as a community if we can build out that information to help other stitchers as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that tutorial helpful to help you get started loading your chatelaine into Pattern Keeper. I hope I've sparked your curiosity for using Pattern Keeper for your chatelaines or just stitching a chatelaine. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.